Okay. Hello, everyone. This is Lauren Steiner, and welcome to tonight's edition of the Robust Opposition. This is the first time I'm using my iPad, and I can't quite figure out where to look because it's like not centered or something. But anyway, I haven't done a show in a while, but those of you who follow me know that the shows that I have been doing have been almost exclusively about the genocide in Gaza for the past year. It's probably the most significant event that's ever happened in my lifetime. Of course, it's not the worst genocide. It's not like Rwanda or Cambodia, but it's the first one that's happening in my name as a Jewish person and with my tax dollars. So I've been doing everything I can, seemingly futilely, to try to put an end to this madness. And in the course of it, I did go to the Democratic Convention and work with some people to unveil a Stop Arming Israel banner during Joe Biden's speech. And the morning of that speech, I attended the Adandon Harris press conference, where I met some of the people that are on my show tonight. So now we are going into the 14th month of the genocide, and there seems to be no end in sight. They say 43,000 people have been killed, but The Lancet and others think it's closer to maybe 200,000. And now they're taking it into Lebanon and possibly into Iran. And the US has done nothing except support it, fund it, and arm it. So understandably, Muslims in this country have been terribly, terribly upset. And the question is, will Kamala Harris lose the election because she has stated loudly and clearly that she plans to do nothing different from Biden? So I'm going to welcome my guest into the show. And we have right now, we have Hudhayfah Ahmad, who is the media representative of Adandon Harris, started out as Adandon Biden. We have Zakir Siddiki, who is the campaign manager of Adandon Harris in Arizona, and Pooyan Ordoubadi, or say your last name because I don't see it in front of me.
Ordoubadi.
Ordoubadi, yes, who is the co-chair of Adandon Harris here in North Carolina. Welcome to the show, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Great. So my first question is to you, Pooyan. I would like to ask you to tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, what you do, and what drew you to this movement.
Sure. So my name is Pooyan Ordoubadi. I'm an immigration attorney here in Apex, North Carolina. I primarily practice immigration law, but also some criminal defense. I represented the Green Party in their 2022 ballot access case, and I've represented about 40 or so students who have been arrested either at the UNC encampments or at various other universities for protesting the genocide. I joined Adandon Harris, I believe, early November, about a week before we went and spoke at a press conference in front of the Supreme Court in Washington, D.C. And initially was a little reluctant as an immigration attorney to kind of push back against the Democratic administration. But, you know, after, I would say by late October, I just couldn't take it anymore. And I thought that something needed to be done. And then I was contacted by someone in Adandon Biden at the time. They invited me to come along. So I was very happy to do so. And I've been the North Carolina co-chair since then.
Great. Now, Hudhayfah, why don't you tell us about the origins of Adandon Biden, which ultimately turned into Adandon Harris?
Sure thing. After the Israeli assault on October 7th, a couple of individuals within the Muslim community got together and through a grapevine and apparatus that already existed within the Muslim community that was built post 9/11 in the form of humanitarian aid organizations, various charitable organizations, civil rights organizations. We gathered Muslims in different swing states and we called on Joe Biden and gave him an ultimatum. He had until October 31st to call for and enforce a permanent ceasefire. Otherwise, we would campaign against him and we would not vote for him. And this was a big deal because the Muslim community has by and far overwhelmingly voted for the Democratic Party for 22 years. That deadline was ignored. It was missed. And so on November 1st, which we declared as ceasefire deadline day, we campaigned against Joe Biden. We started Abandon Biden, and we said that we would not vote for Joe Biden in the 2024 election. As everyone remembers, Joe Biden steps down July 21st and immediately endorses Kamala Harris. Everyone else falls in line, endorses Kamala Harris. And so we had written in our press release that we did not feel that this was solely a Joe Biden problem. It was a wider problem that included a wide apparatus. That apparatus included Antony Blinken, Jake Sullivan, Brett McGurk, and his number two, quite frankly, who was Kamala Harris. But we gave her some time to reach out to us, and we gave her a chance to distance herself from this horrific policy of Joe Biden. 4 weeks went by and she did nothing. So on August 19th, we officially launched as Abandon Harris and vowed that we would campaign against the Harris Waltz ticket at the 2024 election.
Okay. Zakir, your turn. Tell us about a little bit about your background, what you do, your day job, and how you got involved in this and what motivated you to join.
Yes, I'm one of the newer recruits with the Abandon Harris team. I am a small business owner in Phoenix, Arizona. I own a cafe with my mother and my brother, and we did a couple of fundraisers earlier in the year that saw an incredible turnout from both the Palestinian community, but also the broader community that we serve. The fundraisers were essentially, we did dedicate a day to donate 25% of proceeds to Palestine Children's Relief Fund. And as Muslims in America, we weren't sure what to expect because we are constantly told this is a Muslim issue, but the immediate response told us that this was not just a Muslim issue and that we have support. So that started my journey towards using my voice through the business, and then eventually working on a congressional campaign, and then eventually completely just cutting myself off the Democratic Party because the DNC circus that I had witnessed was just the last attempt I was willing to give the ticket in these circumstances, because I knew Joe Biden was not going to earn my vote by November of last year, but unfortunately, as a lot of Americans were waiting for Kamala Harris to change positions to earn our votes, she did not, and the DNC was a commitment towards the most lethal military in the world, and that solidified my answer that I cannot be working for, promoting the message of the Democrats.
Now, tell me, do any of you have relatives in Palestine?
So early on in October, I think the first week after October 7th, we received word that 15 members of our extended family were killed in northern Gaza, Beit Lahia specifically. So that's my thing. And it's funny because when I talk about it, I've mentioned this several times before. I tell people it feels like I got off easy in the sense that I only lost 15 members of my family. There are people who've lost 10 times that much. There are people who've lost 80 members of their family. There are people whose family members are still alive in Gaza today, and they're subject to starvation and a very slow, painful death. And there are people who just haven't heard from their family. They haven't received confirmation that they've been killed. And so they're stuck between just assuming that they're dead because they haven't heard from them in 4, 5, 6 months, or just holding on to that tiny hope that maybe they're just not able to communicate and they're still alive.
Yeah. It's a horrific situation. Zakir, I know we talked earlier and you told me you have some family there.
Yes, I'm not Palestinian myself, but my aunt married a wonderful gentleman from Khan Yunis, and unfortunately, the world now knows Khan Yunis. No one really knew that name up until last year, and the story that you'll hear from me will echo the same story you'll hear from Hudhayfah, which will echo a lot of similar stories, which is we do our best to stay in contact with the family that is out there, but it is also nearly impossible to hear from people because of the various blockades, the various ways that Palestinians are restricted from just basic necessities of life, like calling home and letting folks know that they're still alive. These are luxuries that a lot of my cousins no longer receive, and seeing the way that they just go about daily life has been heartbreaking. So I don't have any blood relatives myself, but they're my family.
Yeah, it is. The whole thing is so, so heartbreaking. How about you, Pooyan?
No, so I'm from Iran, so I don't have any family in Palestine.
Okay, let's talk about what you've been doing in North Carolina, which is where I live. What have you been doing since you started the chapter here to reach people? Tell us how you're organizing.
Yeah, so North Carolina, I think we've been a little bit luckier in the sense that we kind of partnered with several organizations that already had significant infrastructure here. So MAPAC actually endorsed Jill Stein several weeks before we did. They have a wonderful voter outreach program. So we have joined them. We've spoken at several masjids together. We've spoken at voter education forums together. I've spoken at 3 different university MSAs. We've been flyering several masjids, businesses, airports. And really, and I think everyone's going to probably echo the same thing, the challenge was trying to get people to know who the Green Party was, and then also after that, trying to convince them that they should come out and vote. There were so many people who I think had given up because they didn't realize that they had a different choice. They thought they had to either vote for Biden Harris or Trump. Neither of them was an attractive option for them. So, you know, the first few events that we went to, you know, the turnout was low. And the questions were always like, who? But slowly as things have progressed, that we've been getting far more enthusiasm. Butch Ware and Jill Stein both came here and spoke at North Carolina. Both of the events were well attended. So we've been happy about the progress that we've been making here.
Well, before I ask you, Zakir, about how you've been organizing in Arizona, I want to go back to Hudhayfah and ask him when Adandon Harris decided to endorse Jill Stein, because when I covered your press conference at the DNC, you had not made that decision yet. What led up to that?
Yeah, we had not made it yet. So our original plan was not really to endorse. We wanted to take things step by step. We believe that, number one, like Pooyan said, a lot of people aren't even aware that there was a third party. Number two was convincing them to vote for a third party. And so our original plan was to just push people away from 2+ decades of voting for the Democratic Party towards a third party and believing in the long-term strategy of voting for a third party. What ended up happening was multiple people in multiple swing states were approached, and I'm talking about Adandon Harris co-chairs, Adandon Harris leaders, were approached by members of their community who kept telling them, don't just tell me who not to vote for, tell me exactly who to vote for. And we tried to sort of continue on with the strategy of, look, just vote for any third party. It doesn't matter. Just let's get you to break out of. But what was going on is people were being subject to massacre after massacre, dead babies on a daily basis, horrific images and videos that it just accelerated everything. They're like, I'm there. Just tell me who to vote for. And so we're beholden to our community. We represent our community. We have to listen to our community. We're not like any other Muslim American group that claims to represent the Muslim American community, but whose sole job is actually to deliver their votes to a very specific party, i.e. the Democratic Party. I'm specifically speaking about groups like Engage. I'm specifically speaking about movements like Uncommitted, quite frankly. They were never going to break away from the Uncommitted. They were never going to break away from the Democratic Party. And so we got together and we had a discussion and we decided to take a vote that we had to present our community with one name. And when we took a vote by plurality, and when I say plurality, I mean 5 votes for Jill Stein, 4 votes for Cornel West, 3 votes for Claudia de la Cruz. That's how it was decided. We decided to go with Dr. Jill Stein and Dr. Butch Ware for an endorsement. And so after we coordinated and released the Imam's letter, the letter of Muslim American religious clerics calling on Muslim Americans to vote for third party, on October 7th, we went ahead and announced our endorsement of the Jill Stein Butch Ware ticket, while also making it very specific that if there was anyone who did not agree with that endorsement, that's fine. Go vote for any other third party. You cannot sit at home and not vote.
Well, not to tout my own horn, but you do remember the day before you had your press conference, you had an organizing meeting, and I stood up and I said, I was hearing too many people saying we have to punish Harris. And I said, that's not a very positive message. It's going to inspire a lot of backlash. It sounds petulant. And it's always better to be for something than to be against something. And I'm glad you chose Jill Stein, not only because I know her and I think she's a person of impeccable character and has core convictions, unlike the other 2 candidates, principles that she stood by. And the Green Party has a wonderful platform. But she, I think, may be the only one who could get to 270 votes. Not that she will, but technically speaking, she could. Am I correct about that? Her being the only one that could get 270 electoral votes?
Yeah, and that was one of the deciding factors was ballot access. Again, I always have to emphasize to people, it was nothing against Dr. Cornel West, nothing against Claudia de la Cruz, both fantastic individuals, wonderful individuals. But it wasn't up to us. Our community wanted a name, and when we put it up to a vote by plurality, Jill Stein, Butch Ware won, and a big part of that was ballot access.
Yes, and it should be said that Butch Ware is an African-American Muslim. So he reaches a very specific audience as well. So back to you, Zakir. Talk about how you got involved in Arizona and how you've been organizing there.
So I got involved very organically, which I think has been why pitching it to other volunteers has just been very easy. I'm blessed with about 20 to 40 volunteers that are individually motivated just like me, but I was very closely watching the entire political spectrum, the DNC, everything afterwards, and I lucked out and stumbled across a interview from Dr. Jill Stein, Dr. Butch Ware on The Breakfast Club, and hearing Dr. Butch Ware for the first time, it set something on fire inside of me. I had never heard anyone speak so candidly about empire and the United States specifically having such an active role in all of the imperial activities we take part in, but then also be running for office. Normally, you don't see activists and politicians, you don't really see that intersection as often. So that told me that this is someone I can actually get behind. And then I scrolled down to the comments and I saw 10,000 other people saying similar things. And it felt very, very like, where have you guys been? Like, I didn't know that there was this entire movement that, like, I was following Dr. Stein, I was following Dr. West, I was following Claudia de la Cruz because I knew they were third-party candidates. But that moment really told me, from the way he was speaking to the ballot access, to the way he was answering a lot of the smears that were coming from Angela Rye, there was a lot of moments that told me this is a candidate that I want to get behind and I want to tell more people about. And so I started telling people about that video and just trying to pay attention to the reactions, and they were similar. And I started getting a little bit more excited with the Adandon Harris stuff. I think Hazem and Hudhayfah could probably sense that, because soon after that, I was offered the campaign manager position with Arizona Adandon Harris. So it was really, truly a natural progression for me because I have been the political friend telling everyone vote blue no matter who before. And similar to 2020, I feel a little bit of that scorn. Like I trusted you and you lied to me. And that is why I see this movement as the only avenue. And I share the sentiment about the uncommitted movement. I have a lot of friends that were with that movement, but I've actually been happy to see some of those folks that I met in Washington State with the uncommitted posting their individual support for Dr. Stein. So I do think that there is a movement on the rise, and I just got lucky for finding out about it pretty early.
But how are you organizing? I understand you go to mosque. Are you particularly targeting Muslims or young people or young Muslims?
Yes.
What's the strategy?
We're definitely looking out for young people and Muslims especially. The thing that I tell all the volunteers is you don't want to be having these conversations with folks that aren't going to call it a genocide. You have to at least know that they are willing to acknowledge that before you start with the whole down with the duopoly stuff, because obviously you don't want to be wasting your energy, your time canvassing a whole mall of people that are very, very set and concrete in their ways. So I was encouraging them to think about your friends that you were going to the protests with, think about who you saw at the encampments and who you're not hearing from now, because a lot of the conversations for all of us have kind of come to a halt because in the community there's a lack of discourse, there's a lack of leadership, and I see this as an opportunity for leadership to come out of it. And these kids have really been running with the basics of teaching organizing, because I'm learning myself, and canvassing, media literacy, doing a know your rights seminar with lawyers, like things to really up their confidence so they feel ready to talk about these issues, because otherwise it's a movement with one or two people that can talk about it and a lot of other people that are just giving their thumbs up.
Now, Hudhayfah, how many Abandon Harris chapters are there? Are you guys just in the swing states or more states?
So we focused heavily on the swing states to build out the swing states because that's where our numbers are not just enough to swing it one way or another, but also a lot of the Muslim community is heavily concentrated in those areas. So, for example, I live in Arizona, and Arizona is a state that Joe Biden in 2020 won by 10,450 votes. There are 109,000 Muslims in the state of Arizona, 1/3 of whom are voters. So that's 3 times the number we need to swing the state away from the Democratic Party. So that's why we focused heavily on swing states. However, we have chapters in places like California, places like Washington State, places like New York, places like Florida. I don't really consider Florida a swing state, but we've our initial efforts were focused solely on swing states. But what's happened is the Abandon Harris movement, and I think Pooyan can speak to that as well, has expanded so rapidly due to everyone else faltering and disappointing in one way or another. So, for example, when Uncommitted decided to do a roundabout endorsement of Kamala Harris, a lot of people left Uncommitted and came over to Abandon Harris. When Engage did a direct endorsement of Kamala Harris, a lot of people left Engage and came over to Abandon Harris. And so we've sort of been trying to manage this growth and not, I guess, be a victim of our own success. And that's been very difficult. But yeah, just that was a roundabout way of answering your question. We're heavily focused in swing states, but we also exist in states that are not swing states, such as Texas, California, Washington State, New York, so on and so forth.
Okay. Now, Pooyan, talk about when you talk to the people in North Carolina, what are some of the common objections that you're hearing and how do you answer them?
Yeah, so the first one that I always get is, but what about Trump, right? That's kind of like the main thing that everyone says.
Yeah.
I think over time, I think the message has been much easier to deliver than it was at the beginning. So let's talk about, for example, the one I hear all the time is that Trump is going to deport all the protesters. Well, we have to really kind of try and figure out, like, is that even possible? Like, can you deport American citizens? Obviously not. You can't deport an American citizen for protesting. The vast majority of people, at least at the UNC encampment, I would say, I think 39 out of 40 of them were US citizens. So no one's going to get deported. Using the troops to stop demonstrations. Like I said, right now, I'm representing 40 students. We have a Democratic president, we have a Democratic attorney general, we have a Democratic governor, we have a Democratic state attorney general, and the district attorney who's prosecuting them is also a Democrat. So
Wow.
the fear it's an Orange County. So right now, those types of threats are just kind of, defanged. Not necessarily anything that we've done. It's just that this administration is just so overzealous in its defense of Zionism that it's just easier for us. Immigration was the other big issue. And, as an immigration attorney at the beginning, I had some concerns about that. But then the border bill that the Democrats pushed forward it went far beyond anything that Donald Trump had ever proposed. And the issue with that, too, is that everything that Donald Trump wants to do, it's only possible if the Democrats can pass this border bill. So it's so clear that they're just working together. Before, when Trump did all of his nonsense on immigration, all he managed to do was clog up all the court systems because they have a right to a court hearing before they're deported. The Democratic border bill wants to get rid of those legal protections for immigrants who are going to get picked up and deported. So thankfully, there's just some political nonsense that stopped that from being passed. But the only way that Trump can do what he wants is if the Democrats get what they want first. Again, those arguments are just defanged just by the process of the Democrats overstepping their bounds. Now, Kamala Harris is going around talking about, we need to build that wall.
Yeah.
8 years ago, it was unheard of that, I think she herself was like, it's such a ridiculous proposition, blah,
Yeah.
blah, blah. So, the Democrats have gone so far to the right that our message is a little bit easier. I'll tell you, even talking to my close family members and things, like in November and December, they were not hearing it. I would say by February, March, it was a lot easier. By July, it was even easier. There was the hiccup with Biden dropping out and Harris stepping in, unfortunately. I think if that happened before, I think we would be in a much better situation just because Kamala Harris is such a terrible politician. So those are the concerns that I have. And then, of course, the other one is, well, the Green Party doesn't have a path to victory. And my response has always been the same. I said, well, look, it could take us 12 years, 16 years, 20 years, however long it takes a third party to be in a position to win. It'll take the Democrats and the Republicans longer to abandon Zionism. Right now, after a year or more, 14 months of seeing the most horrific cruelty, just unimaginable cruelty, the Democratic Party is closer to Israel than ever before.
Yeah.
There's no, these parties are just so far gone in their corruption. We're watching a declining empire. And so I think what people aren't realizing is that abandon Harris, yes, we want to punish Harris. We want to also build an alternative, and we'd like to save our democracy. And we're some of the only people who are here trying to save our democracy, which is a bit ironic, I think.
Yeah, the one I love is that Trump could be worse, or Trump will be worse. And my response is always, what could be worse than a genocide? And then they talk about him moving the embassy. You're comparing moving the embassy to killing 200,000 people. Come on, Sagar Enjeti, I don't know if any of you guys watch Breaking Points with Crystal Ball and Sagar Enjeti. He's a conservative, she's a liberal, but neither of them are partisan as far as parties go. So they have really respectful discussions, and they agree on a lot of things, and they disagree on, some. And I find myself agreeing with a lot of what he said. And he made a really good case the other day in his monologue for the fact that really presidents don't have a lot of control over domestic policy as they do over foreign policy, because they have the Congress they have to deal with, they have the courts, they have the state governments, and they have the agencies. it's really in foreign policy where, where they can do the most damage. And so that's one of the things, like I try to calm people down about Project 2025 and ending our democracy or bringing fascism to the United States. Like, a lot of this is not going to happen. Do not worry. And, you know, the other thing is, ironically, they seem to be so worried about fascism in this country. But what about the fascism that we're enabling, supporting, funding, and arming in Israel-Palestine? Like, why aren't they concerned about that? Anyway, Zakir, what are some of the objections that you're getting, or reactions? They don't always have to be objections, but what are you finding as you talk to people in your community?
Definitely not a lot of originality with the Blue MAGA crew. So I'm hearing a lot of what Pooyan is hearing. The what about Trump? And more specifically, the three that I've identified, especially in Arizona, are immigration, abortion, and healthcare. And that's those are three rights that I think most Americans would want to have better healthcare, better access to housing, lots of different things that all Americans are currently deprived of. But they always bring up those three. And prior to taking the job, I wanted to do some research. I wanted to figure out, how do I answer those questions? Because I don't want to be telling people they should be voting for my cause, but it's fine to hurt their cause. And specifically on all three of those policy issues, the argument that Trump would be worse or that Harris would be better does not hold any water. With immigration specifically, Joe Biden has built more border wall than Donald Trump did. And we saw on the Anderson Cooper segment, she's now saying that she wants to build the wall, but that her wall will be better. So it doesn't really seem like they're speaking to the ideals that liberals think they're voting for when they say, I want to protect immigration. With abortion, more specifically in Arizona and a number of other states, there are ballot initiatives currently. So you can vote both for abortion and against genocide. And that, I've never had a response go past that conversation, because people, once they are met with that, they realize, oh, I have a very base level understanding of politics. If you meet them with the fact that you are paying just as much attention to those rights as these rights, that will invite some curiosity. It will invite some level of trust where they understand you're not just throwing a temper tantrum, as many people like to bill it. You're actually trying to point them to the fact that this is the second most consequential election that we've experienced just in the last 5 years, because this was the same billing that we received for 2020, when the topic of that election was police brutality. And we were all told, vote for him because that is the lesser of two evils. And I like reminding people about that, because I also then like to follow that up with the fact that, unfortunately, police brutality peaked in 2023 and it is on record to peak again in 2024. Yet none of these conversations are happening. So we're getting further away from the solutions, and we're getting told to vote blue no matter who and forget about the problems from the last 4 years. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, you know, I just posted a couple of articles on Facebook that maybe I'll post in the chat when we're done, about how the Democratic Party has veered so far from the party of FDR and the party of LBJ, where we actually provided these programs. You don't hear anybody talking about Medicare for all anymore, even Bernie. You don't hear anybody talking about raising the minimum wage. And, you know, they're just trying to be as conservative as the Republicans. And she's campaigning with Republicans and Liz Cheney, and she's proud of that. And Liz Cheney voted with Trump 93% of the time. I mean, and like you said, when 2020, it was really all about George Floyd, and all those concerns have fallen by the wayside. So it's very, very concerning what's happening to the Democratic Party. And if we could build a third party somehow, it would really be the best that we could do. So, Hudhayfah, you're in Michigan right now. Michigan is kind of the epicenter of the Muslim community. You said it's like crazy there now. Talk about what you're experiencing like 2 days before the election.
So I have a couple of friends who live in Detroit, Dearborn specifically, some of the suburbs outside of Detroit, and I'd come and visit here regularly since 2017. And what people need to understand is that Michigan used to have this institutional foundation in terms of the electorate, specifically the Muslim electorate. The Muslim American electorate used to have certain organizations, certain foundations, certain institutions, and there was order, right? There was, there was a solidified understanding of, electoral politics and how we should vote, and all of that is gone now. What's happened is some people, a very minority people, are for Harris, but they're not saying it. And the fact that Donald Trump has been coming here regularly to visit and speak about the fact that Kamala Harris is campaigning with Liz Cheney and what Dick Cheney has done and the harm he has done to the Muslim American community and the Arab American community, not just domestically, but overseas. And constantly bringing this up, has pretty much ensured by recent polls that Michigan may turn red. And what's happened is we were trying to build something in Michigan to get people, people don't want to vote Democrat. The Democrats have lost the Muslim and Arab vote. Okay, don't sit at home and not vote. That was our main challenge. Don't just sit at home and not vote. Vote for a third party. That used to be our main challenge. Now it feels like we are trying to take voters away from Donald Trump to the Green Party in Michigan. That's how badly Democrats have shot themselves in the foot here in Michigan, in a state that Donald Trump barely won in 2016. And it was a surprise when he won it. And so we were canvassing today. We were door knocking. We were trying to talk to people. And Trump signs everywhere. No one wants to speak about a third party. They feel like they're hurt. They're in pain. They're grieving. They're sad. And here comes a politician knocking on their door saying, I'll end the war. I'll bring peace. It'll be just like when I was president. And for people who are in immense pain, that sounds very appealing. And you can sit there and tell them, like, look, you're being taken advantage of, and they don't care. They're either two-party minded, so now that they're out of the Democrat, they're going to vote for the Republicans, or they genuinely believe Donald Trump is going to bring about immense harm, and they're just of the opinion of just let it all burn down. And as Adandon Harris, we've been trying to talk to these people. Let's build something else. Let's build a new path. Let's pave a new way forward. And like I said, it's been pretty insane here, and I by and large blame the Democratic Party for the chaos I'm witnessing right now in Michigan.
Yeah, now I heard an interesting thing. You mentioned MPAC, and that's a different organization. That's an MPAC in North Carolina, but there's also an MPAC that's national. And they had, that's a Muslim Public Affairs Action Committee, I think. They had a webinar the other day in which they had these a Muslim woman who works for the Harris campaign, a Muslim guy who was for Trump, and then Jill Stein, and then they had this guy, Usama Jamal, who's like not for either of them. He didn't necessarily say he was for Jill Stein, but he sounded like he might be. And it was just like, I couldn't believe some of the things that the Harris person was saying. Like she has expressed sympathy for the plight of the Palestinians. She has called for a ceasefire. She has called for more aid. Well, what's the good of that if they're not letting the aid go through? And we know that they can end this with one phone call, and she's not saying that she's going to do it. Now, I understand her position. If she said she was going to do it, she wouldn't win because AIPAC would target her. But AIPAC wants Trump to win anyway, I think. But they wouldn't directly go after her if she didn't say anything. So in a way, I kind of sympathize with her. I really don't like her because I don't think she's a woman that has any core convictions or principles except getting elected to the next office. I lived in California for 33 years, and she had a terrible, criminal justice record, terrible record on handling people who were fraudulently foreclosed upon. I was part of Occupy. We had Occupy, excuse me, fights foreclosures. We had to protest her because she wouldn't even meet with these families that were foreclosed upon. They had to protest her at the California Democratic Convention. I remember that. And then, of course, famously in 2020, she was for Medicare for all. She was for a ban on fracking. She was for a humane immigration policy. And now, as the political winds have shifted, she has shifted. So that's probably the thing that bothers me the most, is voting for someone who has no ideology beyond their own ambition. And, Trump only cares about his money and his ego. So, at least we know with Jill Stein, she's a principled person with core convictions. Do you ever talk about those kind of things with people, any of you, when you're talking? Does that mean anything to a voter? Or are they more talking about the actual issues, like you said, healthcare, housing, immigration?
So, initially when we were talking to people, it was really specifically about Palestine. I think as people started to understand the Green Party platform, I think they have been quite receptive to it, at least to some parts of it. And I think that Professor Ware is really able to kind of bridge the gap between kind of like Islam and then the Green Party platform to some extent. So, for example, and I do like Jill Stein, when Butch Ware came, the crowd was far more, there were far more people who were excited to see Butch Ware, including like a lot of the students who, and definitely want to talk to Zakir afterwards, because that has been kind of a tough sell for us, trying to get the students involved. But they were very, very excited to see Professor Ware. So I think they're kind of seeing him because he's made it very clear that he wants to kind of be the future of the Green Party. So I'm hoping, right now the Green Party is in a situation where they have several people, hundreds of thousands of people who are extremely interested, and it's really up to them to kind of understand that they owe our community a lot, and to also, to some extent, to be very inviting and receptive to us who are here. And I'm hoping that that is something that continues in the future. But yes, I think as people learn about the Green Party platform, I think they have come to certainly appreciate and understand it. Whereas before it was almost exclusively, as long as you're not, whoever you are, I don't know who you are, but you're not Biden, Harris, or Trump. So that's why we're supporting you.
Okay. Now you touched on this a little bit about uncommitted and their, I call it their non-endorsement endorsement. For people that don't know, what exactly did they say? It's so convoluted. I think they lost so much respect after that.
So uncommitted, we need to specify, was consulted by the Democratic Party. They had DNC consultants leading them. They had DNC political operatives leading them. And so early on, we did work with them when it came to the Michigan primary, but we quickly realized that we had nothing in common in terms of next steps forward. They believed in appealing to the soul of the Democratic Party, and we did not believe the Democratic Party had any soul. And funny enough, we were vindicated in the end, particularly when Uncommitted was outside the DNC, talking about or saying the names of the people that were killed in Gaza, and you saw Democrats walking by, fingers in their ear, mocking the names. So it turns out we were right. What happened is, at the end of it, when push came to shove, they released a statement saying, we cannot endorse Kamala Harris. We strongly caution against voting for Trump. We strongly caution against voting for third party. We strongly caution against sitting at home and not voting. Now, when you use very strong language, very strong negating language, and then very soft language towards something, a 12-year-old can sort of see exactly what you're saying. So you strongly say, do not vote for Donald Trump. Do not vote third party. Do not sit at home and not vote. We cannot endorse Kamala Harris. That's a roundabout way of endorsing Kamala Harris. And the rep, who was known to be with Uncommitted, Rua Ruman, wrote an article talking about why she was voting for Kamala Harris. And ironically, this line of a vote for Stein is a vote for Trump was ironic because it eventually led to the thought process, the mentality that she writes about in her article, where she says, I'm voting for Harris, but this is not a vote for her. It's like, what are you saying? This is literally a vote for Harris. And it doesn't matter whether you vote for her enthusiastically, you vote for her with eagerness and happiness, or you vote for her reluctantly, or you vote for her in disgust. A vote is a vote, and they all count the same in the end. There's no ballot person who's like, oh, this person voted reluctantly, so we're going to count it as 0.5 or 0.1. No, that's not how it works. And so what we saw with Uncommitted was a way where they could not outright endorse Kamala Harris because the community they claim to come from and represent would have completely disavowed and disowned them. So they did a roundabout endorsement, which they thought was a safer option, and they still ended up being lambasted and disavowed by their community because, as I said, the Muslim American community is tired of games. They're tired of placating words. They're tired of nonsense, and they're tired of people, not being straightforward with them.
Yeah, I felt that when I was in Chicago, when we went to that event at the Palestinian Community Center. It's the largest Palestinian community in the country, right outside of Chicago there. And those people were hopping mad. They didn't want to hear anything about the Democrats. But that Rua, how do you pronounce her last name? Rua.
In Arabic, it's Roman, but usually people call her Roman.
Okay, so, I heard her speak at, where Jesse Jackson was honored. I forget the name of that place, but I went to Jim Zogby's organization. They had a lot of panels, and I went every day to hear the speakers, and I met her. And she seemed like she was doing a really good job in Georgia. But then when I heard her sort of crying her crocodile tears when she was reading the statement outside of the convention, they decided to have a sit-in or a sit-out outside the convention. They didn't choose to, by the way, join our action with the Stop Arming Israel banner and chanting ceasefire now, which you think they would have agreed to chant since even Kamala has called for a ceasefire. They wouldn't do that. We invited them. But then when they couldn't get her to be a speaker, and this is a woman, by the way, who is a Harris delegate, who has said, like you said, that she's voting for Harris, and she gave them a speech, and they couldn't even do that. I mean, it made the uncommitted movement look so bad. And I'm wondering if this woman has Stockholm syndrome. I mean, she was personally dissed by Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party, and here she is. And there's so many people like that, like Nora, what was her name? Eric Hart or something, somebody who Jill Stein, Ericat. You know what I'm talking about. She's a lawyer, Muslim lawyer in New York, and she was invited to be the running mate. And she said she would only do it if Jill Stein only ran in, do you remember what I'm talking about? She wanted to defang the campaign or something.
So she had agreed. She had been asked to be the VP for Jill Stein, and she said one of the conditions was that if the campaign agreed to an arms embargo of Israel and an immediate ceasefire, that the Green Party would cease their campaign so that people could focus on beating Trump. And while I didn't agree with it, I did understand in the fact that her goal was just end the genocide as fast as possible. Noura Erekat's goal wasn't necessarily in that moment to build something beyond the duopoly. And I can understand it. I may not agree with it, but I can understand it. Her goal was, listen, let's just, from what I believe, end the genocide as quickly as possible. And I feel like this would accomplish that. And I think this just goes to show, in regards to, I wouldn't draw parallels between Ruwa and Noura, because I believe they're two different people with two different ideologies and two different methodologies. But I believe the problem is, and I don't like to denigrate anybody, and I don't like to lambast anybody, but it really hurt me to see uncommitted treated the way that they were at the DNC, and take it. I don't know if that makes sense. It really hurt me to see them. Like, for example, I saw on their account, their Twitter account, them tweeting, AOC has decided to join our sit-in via FaceTime. AOC was not in a different state or a different country. AOC was inside the building. If she wanted to join the sit-in, she could have walked outside and sat with them. And it really upset me to see them denigrated this way, and then to see them allow themselves to be trotted on and walked on this way, and eventually still vote for this party that has pretty much spat in their face.
Yeah. Yeah, AOC, she's dead to me now. When she called Jill Stein predatory, I mean, it was so far beyond what she needed to do to make her point, to actually challenge Jill Stein on her character like that. It was just unconscionable. Let's talk about the chances in these states, because just 2 days ago, I wrote that excuse me, that I thought Kamala was going to win Michigan, Wisconsin, and what was the other one I said? Michigan and Pennsylvania. And Trump was going to win Arizona and Nevada, and North Carolina was a toss-up. And I've been saying about North Carolina, because of our hurricane here, so many of the rural communities got wiped out. I mean, houses were destroyed, cars were destroyed, roads were washed over, polling stations were. I tried to get some data from this guy I know who's on the Board of Elections to see the early voting, because the early voting in Buncombe County has been very strong. I waited online for a very long time in my polling place on Tuesday, and yet Mecklenburg County, which I'm coming to learn, I've only lived here for 4 years, Mecklenburg County has the most Democrats, the most registered Democrats, but they always undervote. And people in the Democratic Party are mad at them for always underperforming. So, I mean, I think it could go either way. I know Trump is worried because he's spending the last 3 days here in North Carolina. What are your thoughts about the chances in North Carolina, Pooyan?
Yeah, my concern was actually exactly the same about the hurricane. Luckily, again, through no efforts of our own, the Democrats kind of shot themselves in the foot. Kamala Harris came out and basically stated that everyone who, so I think a lot of people don't know, in Western North Carolina, there's a lot of flooding. So a lot of insurance companies don't insure those homes at all. So many people are not going to be able to rebuild. And then, so for Kamala Harris to kind of be the face of hurricane relief and come out and say, like, look, if you qualify, we'll give you $750 when people have lost everything. $750 isn't enough for groceries for 2 weeks, you know?
Yeah.
And on the same day, they sent Israel $8.7 billion. So I think people are starting to kind of see just the abject corruption. I still think, so both MAPAC endorsed Jill Stein, and so did the Charlotte Muslim Caucus in Charlotte, North Carolina. I don't, from the polling that I've seen, I'm still pretty confident that Trump is going to win North Carolina. I think it'll be closer. I can understand why he would want to campaign here, but I'm seeing a lot of voter enthusiasm outside of the area that I live. Anytime I drive to court outside of the Triangle area, it seems pretty overwhelmingly pro-Trump. So, you know, and I think there's potentially a lot more voter apathy, maybe on the Democrat side. But one thing that has been concerning me is that I feel like there's some weird coordinated campaign to kind of take down, all Jill Stein signs, you know, because we're the ones who put them up, so we notice when they get taken down immediately. And then also a lot of Trump signs are being taken down too. But again, I live in a very, very blue area, North Carolina, so I still think that that Trump is going to take North Carolina. I think Nevada is closer than it needs to be, because they were able to kick the Greens off the ballot there. And I think that the Greens would actually have been pretty strong in Nevada. So I think if the Democrats manage to take that, I think, you know, unfortunately, it's because of their undemocratic actions.
Well, people may not know what they did in North Carolina 2 years ago to our friend Matt Howe. They posed as Green Party members and called up people who had signed his ballot, you know, to get him on the ballot. And they said, "Are you sure you want to vote for this guy?" And they ended up calling the chairman of the Green Party, I think, was it Tony Endigo, or who did they call? And he blew the whistle on it, and it went to court, and I think they had to pay a fine or something, if I'm not mistaken. But the worst thing about it is that Kamala didn't even come to this area. Joe Biden does a flyover. Kamala goes to Charlotte and Raleigh, and Biden and Trump comes to Swannanoa, which was the community that was most impacted. Now, of course, everything out of his mouth is BS, but at least he got his butt over here, you know? So what does the situation look like in Arizona?
The situation also pretty similar. I just, before hopping on, saw polling data that was tweeted out by a trusted journalist about the edge that the Republicans have over the Democrats, around 1.53% based on like registrations comparing against 2020 elections. I'll send you the article, but to not bore you, the article is basically saying that with that edge that they already have, and also considering the 0.5% that the Arab American / Muslim voting population represents, it does look like Arizona is going to be swinging for the Republicans. So that is obviously a conversation that gets people, depending on what stage they are in the movement, either uncomfortable or excited. But I feel resolute with the fact that abandon Trump might attract more people than abandon Harris would. So I feel like we'll have some of our allies and friends that disappeared from those encampments coming back in, whether it's weeks or months. I want people to understand that this is a movement about raising our voices collectively, and we have not had any real voice through the Democratic Party.
Yeah, and I think it also needs to be said that, you know, when Democrats get elected, the resistance goes to sleep. And some of the worst things that happened that caused Trumpism happened because of Clinton's policies and Obama's policies. And, you know, you can defeat Trump, but you're not going to defeat Trumpism unless you start to meet the material needs of the 99%. And it doesn't look like the Democratic Party is going in that direction at all. So my final question to you is, where does Abandon Harris go after this election? Obviously, you're not going to have that name anymore. What are you all talking about doing with this movement that you've built up over this time?
So in regard to whether we keep the name or not, I guess it depends on the results. And so in regard to the results, I guess I should let everyone know that we did do our own projections. And in terms of worst case scenario, we had Wisconsin going red, Michigan going blue, Pennsylvania going blue, Georgia going red, Arizona going blue, which in our projections, the Democrats would win the Electoral College 271 to 267. And so in that worst case scenario, where between Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Georgia, they were split down the middle, two here, we needed a state that could sort of be the swinger, and that one was Arizona. It was the easiest in terms of the margin that the Democrats won by in 2020, which was 10,450, and the population of Muslim voters in Arizona, which is around 36,000. And so that's what we saw. Now, if Harris wins, I've been very frank with people. Whether we get our way or not, our next objective is going to be the same. For the first time in its history, the Muslim American community has politically galvanized and mobilized under one umbrella. And that is the belief that the two-party system is unsustainable. This genocidal duopoly is unacceptable. We need to do something more. We need to do something else. We need to carve a different way forward. And so whether Trump wins on Tuesday or whether Harris wins on Tuesday, our objective is going to be to build on the momentum that we have already garnered and gathered. We'd like, to point people to the fact that we only started organizing like this a year ago. We've only done this with 1 year of work. Imagine what it's going to look like with 2 years or 4 years or 10 years. As a matter of fact, Abandon Harris started August 19th. So we've only had about 3-4 months to seriously organize against the Harris Waltz ticket. And what we've accomplished in that short time is nothing short of miraculous, nothing short of stupendous. When you talk about a community that has voted straight Democrat for 22 years to just collectively wake up and say, look, this is not right. This is unsustainable. We don't want to be a ping pong ball between the Democrats and the Republicans. We'd like actual, tangible, practical electoral power. We'd like actual voice. We'd like actual substantial policy. We want to work towards something else. And that's what the next step is going to be, to continue to build on that towards the goal of hopefully having an election where we can vote for something and see a win on the horizon.
Do you think you're still going to have a role in this, Pooyan?
Yeah, absolutely. At first I didn't really know what the future was going to hold. But in our last few meetings, I think it's been pretty clear. I think also, just before I know you're wrapping up, I do want to say, we constantly hear that the Green Party only runs on the top of the ticket. Well, if you're in North Carolina, obviously we are on the top of the ticket, but we have a candidate for governor, Wayne Turner. We have a candidate for our city council, Joshua Bradley, and we have a candidate for Wake County District 2, Michael Dublin. So I wanted to add that in there before. But yes, I think that we're a very new organization. I'm not a political savant or anything like that. This is my first foray into any of this. So I think it's been a learning experience, and I'm very excited to see what we're going to be able to do moving forward. And I'm very excited to see, hopefully, many members in our community really kind of running. Several people actually expressed a lot of interest in terms of running on the Green Party ticket, but based on the laws in North Carolina, you had to be a Green Party member by like October 15th or something. Don't quote me on that. It was something like that. So a lot of people couldn't do it. But I think there's a lot of people who are interested in joining and running. We don't need to wait for someone else to represent us. We can run ourselves.
Yeah. And, that's really heartening to hear, because that's one of the big things that came out of the Bernie movement in 2016. A lot of people were inspired to run for office and also to try to take over the Democratic Party in their state. And we had over 600 people elected as Assembly District delegates in January of 2017. They didn't see us coming. And 2 years later, they got rid of a lot of them because they organized. And a lot of the people that were elected were very disappointed with how entrenched the party was in their neoliberal ways. So I don't know how well that really worked out, but what's your plan for your future, Zakir?
Also not really expecting any of this from this past year. So trying to wade my way through all of it. Just yesterday evening, I was having the conversation with my co-owner, mom, saying, hey, might be looking at this a little bit more long term because I might get in trouble for this, but I was offered a very minor leadership position with the Arizona Green Party. So I'm pretty excited by the fact that folks are kind of looking around in confusion. Who do we vote for? Who's going to listen to us? And we're being invited to the table and, in fact, to lead the table discussion. So if this is the avenue that we have to take to raise our voices for all, I definitely see the Green Party as a vehicle for that. And I'm really excited to start working with the Arizona Green Party. And also, quick shout out, like Pooyan inspired me. Eduardo Quintana, Mike Cease, Vincent Beck-Jones, these are a lot of the Green Party candidates that are running on the ballot for this upcoming election for 2024. And I've met a lot of these really been excited by the amount of energy that exists in our movement.
Yeah, it would be really great if the Green Party could spend its time building its party as opposed to challenging all these bogus and baseless attacks by the Democrats, challenging their ballot access, the undemocratic Democratic Party, as I call them. So where can people follow this movement, Hudhayfah? Your socials, your website, whatever you want to tell people?
So, I mean, our website is abandonharris.com, but our socials all have the same which is Abandon Biden 24. A lot of people like to ask why we kept the Abandon Biden name. Part of it, we changed our initial name to Abandon Harris. We kept the registered name of Abandon Biden to remind people that Kamala Harris doesn't just get to separate herself from Biden's policies. She was a foremost player of those policies. She was his second in command. Abandon Biden extends to all those who propped up and backed and helped Biden as he kicked off this genocide and has kept it going in the shadows, apparently outside the news, under the umbrella of Kamala Harris. So our socials are all at Abandon Biden 24, and our website is abandonharris.com.
Great. Well, I want to thank you all for being on the show. I think this was a really great show, and I hope the people watching will share it widely. We only have 2 days to go, and I don't know about you guys, but I cannot wait for this election to be over. And yeah, we'll see what the future brings. But as far as like one last thing I wanted to mention, they talk about, oh, we'll just hold our nose and vote for Harris, and then we'll hold her accountable. And I ask everyone who says that to me, tell me anytime, give me one policy that we've ever been able to hold a Democrat accountable for once we've given them our vote. The time to hold them accountable is when they need our vote, not after they've already got it. So I'm not telling anybody how to vote. I think it's clear how I voted, but I always vote for the candidate that doesn't win. That's just been my history. I voted for Ralph Nader Jesse Jackson in the 80s and Nader in the 90s. And I think the only one I voted for who won was Barack Obama in 2008, because I believed in the hope and change. But in less than 4 years, I realized that was all BS. So I just continue. And I'm proud to say, look, if you're so worried about our democracy, in a democracy, you ought to be able to vote for someone. You shouldn't have to vote for the lesser of two evils or against someone. So I'm happy to say that I voted for the candidate and the platform that I love. And on that note, I want to wish everybody happy voting, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.